And with that, compañeros, welcome to another edition of the Single Data Partners podcast. I am Carlos Chacon, and I'm joined today with Eugene Meininger.
Howdy.
We excuse Mr. Kevin Fiesel from today's program. He was out and about, and we switched platforms on him, and trying to improve our stream quality. So for those of you who are on Twitch, hopefully we won't freeze as much this way. So that's the plan anyway. So we did some testing with it. It worked out rather well. So now let's see if we can go a full hour, or well, not a full hour. As Eugene's eyes bulge, he's like, "Hey, wait a second. Right. This is a 30-minute podcast, right?"
It was at one time.
It was at one time. That's right. Well, the idea was always there. Anyway, so for those of you who are joining on Twitch, welcome. It's nice to have you. If you'd like to listen live, you're welcome to follow us along on Twitch. But as always, the episode will be available wherever fine podcasts are found. And so we'll continue to have that available. So this is episode 236. And the numbers keep going up, right? We keep chugging along there. And today, we are going to be talking a little bit about database monitoring with SQL Sentry, right, which is now a SolarWinds product. But we'd like to talk a little bit about how and why we opted to standardize on the SQL Sentry product. So our show notes for today's episode are going to be found at sqldatapartners.com/monitoring or at sqldatapartners.com/236. And so before we get too much further into our episode, we do have a couple of shout outs. Mm-hmm. And as always, compañeros, you'll forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I do try to run through these before, but then you click the record button, and then your brain just doesn't want to work. So we've got Jeremy Setchler, Richard Last, Lewis Davidson from Tennessee. Welcome, my friend. Peter Daniels, Lalit Mangal, Ginger Grant from Arizona. So hopefully you're enjoying a little cooler weather, Ginger, in Arizona this time of year. Kevin Wilkie in Hotlanta, Lime Gargoyle, Techie Wiz, Christy Mishra, and John Morse. So thank you, compañeros, for giving us a little love, whether that's on social media or connecting with us in some way. We do appreciate it. And so as we record this, we are in the middle of November, and the holidays are approaching. And you might be thinking to yourself, I would really like to get a gift for my friends with the Single Data Partners podcast. I know it happens, regularly. And compañeros, I have great news for you, right? So you can help us out and get something in return, right? This is the classic win-win scenario we've got going on here, Eugene.
So, I think that's called capitalism. I think that's just capitalism. But go on.
Okay, pessimistic, right? I know, I remember why we invited you here. No, just kidding. So you can go to sqldatapartners.com/t-shirt and order your very own Single Data Partners podcast t-shirt. So it's not this one. It's a black t-shirt. I guess I don't have one with me. But you can go. They're very nice. And with that, you'll be helping support the podcast, right? And of course, getting something in return. So we hope that you'll consider that. So this Thursday, which we're going to talk about past Summit in a little bit, but this Thursday, November 18th. So we're recording on the 16th. Your podcasts are going to be available on the 17th. So you don't have a ton of turnaround time. However, we're going to begin our three-part seasonal series, but this is going to be on Intro to T-SQL. So if you're getting started with T-SQL, you can check out SQLDataPartners.com/SQL Trail Seasonal Series. And I think I need a better URL there. You may have to look that up. We'll have it in the show notes, of course. And so many of you will probably be too advanced for this course. But if you know somebody who's looking to get started, an analyst perhaps, or someone who has other functions but needs to get into the database for whatever reason, we invite you to suggest it to your friends or coworkers, right? So they can take a peek. They can take a peek there. And so, spoiler, right? We just so it won't be the same thing, right? This is changing. This is changed up a bit, but we just got through delivering a 5-part series at Past Summit, and that went pretty well. Except for the end session. I heard that last session was a little bit rough.
Well, that's what you get whenever you hire a BI guy to do this people.
Yes, well, it's a funny story that maybe we'll tell one day about how we got looped into that. So
yeah.
Anyway, so our topic today is database monitoring, the SQL Sentry, and I thought perhaps it might be helpful to talk about why or how we got to this point, right? And so so Eugene, I know this is a slightly different world for you, but I think a lot of the same ideas are there, right? We're smart folks, we are around databases, we know how to do stuff, right? And so as we get into offering database services, I know in the very beginning it was kind of like, right, hey, look, here's all this stuff I've learned. Let me apply it and help organizations manage their databases. All good and well.
Right.
But as you start trying to put all that together and kind of take the show on the road, right, we ran into some problems pretty quickly. And so just in terms of consistency, right? Do you have that version of the script? A new version of SQL Server came out, right? And the columns or for the DMVs have changed, or they've added this other extended event option. And so it became a little bit of a hassle, right, to keep up with. And then different versions, right? I have to make sure that it works on SQL Server 2012. I have to make sure that it works on SQL Server 2019, and then of course, which we'll also get to at the end, SQL Server 2022, right? When it's available for us. So all of these pieces, you start putting it together, and that's just the script piece, right? Then, okay, well, how do we share this with the customer, right? So there should be a visualization piece, and how are we going to do that? So as we started thinking about that, and even the community scripts that are great, trying to incorporate some of those pieces, it soon became problematic because we found ourselves, almost in a software development type role, right? When we were really trying to provide database services to customers, right? That's what they were engaging us for, and so a little, I don't know, chicken and an egg, right? But it became a problem in which, okay, do we really need to be managing these pieces? And how could we deliver database help to organizations, right, without all the extra stuff, right?
So, when it comes to what we're talking about, like metrics and all these sorts of things, like how much of it is figuring out what went wrong, like how much is the log file is about to take up all of the disk, right? Sure. Versus how much is no, it's maybe you might call it active maintenance, or just like kind of the health check kind of thing, or like, because in terms of measuring stuff, I could see a bunch of things. I remember during that rare period in my life where I was a DBA, I remember having to do some of this stuff by hand and going into Perfmon and looking at page life expectancy to try and make an argument that maybe we needed more than 8 gigabytes of RAM, right? So,
Sure.
monitoring can mean a lot of stuff. Like what is this? What are y'all using it for right now?
Yeah, right. So that's a great question, because like just that example was a great scenario of why a monitoring system makes sense. A lot of times the scripts or the pieces that are together can take points in time of different things. You see the CPU go up, right? So now you're like, okay, let me find the queries that are taking lots of CPU. But you don't really know if they're correlated. So was that the query that was running when I saw the high CPU? You're somewhat making a
Right.
guess there. And so having something that can help you tie those pieces together, that, oh, yes, it's running, and then my page life expectancy goes down, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So for your crime scene investigation, you have security camera footage, right? That's the hope, because I've had to do that where like page life expectancy would take a dive, and the reason is we were doing like nightly imports. So of course it would take a dive if we're loading a bunch of new data, we're doing a refresh. But yeah, trying to catch stuff in the act can be difficult.
That's right. So that has been one piece that is helpful. The other is we need to be aware of certain situations, right? So we want to know if there's a problem. So the alerting piece is its own separate ball of wax, right? Getting the information is one thing, but then knowing about it or being, in front of that is a completely different thing. I know, in a previous, incarnation that we tried previously, right? Getting the information, kind of putting it together, that actually worked pretty well for the most part. But then it's like, okay, well, now I need to know under what conditions we should jump in, right? And that's
Yeah.
much harder, complexity. So for us, right, the thought is, many hands make light work, and so sharing is caring. And so the thought is okay, well, what if we look to a third party to then help us do some of the pieces and take care of like the alerting, right?
Right.
That's functionality that we don't necessarily need to own. We just need to be the recipients of. We want to leverage that to then be able to take actionable advice or actionable, pieces.
Right. Yeah, because you can roll your own. Like I've done that before. Like whenever I was helping a customer with one of those crime scenes where we were getting lots of locking and blocking, you can set up in native alerts in SQL to be like, okay, whenever this counter gets to this level, send an email.
Right.
But do you really want to be doing that bespoke for every customer? And the other thing is like, it's that whole buy or build kind of mentality. Like, like you said, what is your core competency, right? And ideally, it's not code development. Ideally, it's not setting up alerts. It's understanding the database and how, like the way to keep it healthy, so to speak.
Yeah, no, exactly, right. And that idea of the new versions, and then hey, extended events has these other features. Right, we want to take advantage of those, right?
Right.
But we want to develop all the exceptions, right, for that.
Oh my goodness, I had to write extended events for a customer in 2008 R2 before they had a UI. that was fun. That was some fun auditing to have to do.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And so that we also found it a bit easier to standardize our responses. So the tooling, because so I don't want to say the downside, right? But you have all this customization, you have all this flexibility because you're rolling it your own. You can do it however you want. Once you go to a tool, right, you are kind of working within their parameters, the way they do certain things. But that also then forced us to say, okay, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to move forward with these pieces, which at first might have felt limiting, but it was actually quite helpful. The other piece, right, is that we found that we had a broader base of metrics to start from, right? So they're, again, we were kind of going after the top 3 or 4, but the monitoring tools will just capture more things because, again, they're in the business of capturing and monitoring, right? So some other pieces that initially we may not have considered, but we needed for the crime scene investigation,
Right.
concept, you're like, oh man, I really, would have liked my, whatever, to use that analogy, whatever tool it is. Oh, hey, with the monitor, it's there, right? It's included, and then in our case, we wanted a way to be able to customize that, so we could say, hey, well, yes, that's important in in the business hours, right? Maybe less important during the nighttime, things like that. So, which kind of gets us into the again, configuration of alerts and customizations, right? So it's nice to be able to get that information, but now let me play around with a little bit, or let me adjust when it's important, which then ties into the alerting, right? And that's fairly complex, right? And so we were glad to find a monitoring solution that would allow us to do that.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
The other piece that we also found helpful is so the history captured by default, right? So not all issues are immediately reported, and so sometimes the alerting won't meet a certain threshold, but the user experience can still be poor. So having something that has captured those metrics, right? For, hey, yesterday I was
right,
running this thing and I had a problem, and you're like, oh, great, right? Going from a DMV perspective, almost impossible to identify what that was, right? Having a system that captures that information and can put some metadata on it, right? When it ran, right? Who ran it, all that kind of stuff. Super helpful, right? And it helps us, again, be able to diagnose issues faster, right? Rather than, hey, let me run these cool scripts and try to piece all this together.
Yeah, I mean, if you can tie the user that ran it to the query to potentially the execution plan or something like that, that's a big deal. Do you have any idea how far back that history goes? Because I know, at least when I was dealing with this stuff, being able to say, okay, how busy does the server get when we close our monthly books or do these annual processes can be really helpful sometimes, especially if you're planning on upgrading and doing a new server build. Being able to look over the course of a year and be like, well, what does our load look like? Do we really need this much server? It can be really helpful.
Yeah, so admittedly, that is actually a double-edged sword. So
right.
The history so particularly at that scale.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is when you're looking at, we even find that sometimes looking at a day, you start getting into aggregates, or you start getting into averages.
Sure.
And you miss some of the detail that you need to really dive in. So
no, that makes sense.
I can see where it might be helpful, but you have so many data points, right? Where it's capturing either every 5 seconds, 15 seconds, whatever that is, that you're gonna the outliers are gonna get missed, right? The more data.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
So normally, again, we're defaulting to 2 weeks of history. We can adjust that. Part of that is, again, just like any other piece. Now you can keep pieces of it, if you need to, revert
sure.
back. But
that's enough to catch acute issues, right? Which is really the main thing.
That's right. Exactly. Yep. And I also think it doesn't remove your responsibility to get to know the server a little bit.
Sure.
Right. You still kind of have to have a one-on-one, if you will, with the server from time to time. So the other piece there is that, again, because we're no longer have to worry about, I shouldn't say have to work, that's not quite true. But because our focus is not figuring out how to capture these pieces, but more what to do about it, when we find an issue from a customer, it is easier to apply that to the different environments. So we were able to take those pieces and be like, hey, you know what? We're finding this issue, right? We have an availability group issue, and that this is something that we've seen here. Oh, well, you know what? We haven't seen it this other customer, but let's take that over just in case it happens, and we can apply it there. And that has been helpful. That has been helpful for us. So, so going through and I think one of the benefits that doesn't get talked about from a community perspective as much is your association with the vendors, and kind of, because you're attending the event and they're there, you're able to kind of get well, let me go talk to A, B, and C while I'm at the event, rather than having to have 3 individual webinars or whatever, right? And then pick a tool, by yourself, quote unquote, right? And so one of the great things was we got to see it. You go to sessions, you even talk to some of the the folks that work for those organizations, ask them questions. We got to know the tools, what they were good at, kind of what their approaches were. So full disclosure, SentryOne at the time was a sponsor of the SQL Cruise, the old SQL Cruise.
Oh wow!
Put on.
Yeah.
Right. And so a little bit of history, right? So yours truly was the winner of the Harry Execution Plan contest.
Yeah.
On SQL Cruise, I think, what was it, 2013, something like that?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so you get to know the tooling and whatnot. So I had become familiar with the SentryOne tool, and really, again, all the toolings they all capture things, right? They all display them in different ways. They kind of have their own things about, have their own ways about going about it. So they're going to be helpful in getting that information. One of the things that really stood out to me from a SentryOne or a SQL Sentry perspective was, so again, the dashboard, right? Being able to tie those pieces together, right? So I see a CPU hit, I can click on the dashboard, and then it's going to show me, okay, here's where my memory was, here's where my disk was, right? Here where my wait counts were. And so I can very quickly kind of compare and contrast to be like, okay, well, this doesn't appear to be, I'm not hitting the disk, right, while my CPU is going crazy, right? Things like that. I can start to narrow that down a little bit easier. The other piece that I really like is the SQL Server Agent job visual. So they have like an Outlook-like interface where you can actually see when jobs are scheduled and how long they normally run. So it gives you the average. So previous to this, and some other people still trying to do this in like an Excel, right? Or worse, you're trying to look in like the SQL Server Agent Monitor. And you're like, okay, when does this job run? And that one, and you're like, okay, well, each of these jobs start on the hour, just as an example.
Yeah,
What it doesn't tell you is how long. Well, that first job runs for 4 hours, and the second job runs for 3 hours, and the third job runs for 10 hours. So they're all overlapping, right?
Right. Yep.
So what this has been helpful is to then show the customers, hey, right, there's too many jobs running. We have to kind of pattern this out. It's really easy to think, oh, hey, 1 o'clock in the morning, nobody's working then, right? Let's just schedule it for 1 o'clock.
Yeah, just throw it all at night, right? Yeah.
But when in reality, it's like, okay, well, hey, we may need to spread this out over a little bit. And we actually have a customer that uses it. That they have new processes they want to try and start. And sometimes they're not quite sure how long that's going to take. So now, luckily, they have a situation where they can push some of that to the weekend. But even then, they're looking at the calendar to be like, okay, well, when makes the most sense for me to try this? Because I don't know if it's going to last for a minute or if it's going to last for 8 hours. So what makes the most sense? And then I know that if it runs for, longer than, whatever time, that I'm bumping into something else and I may need to come in and intervene, right? And we try again later. So that has been super helpful to figure out those pieces. Because inevitably, right, that is a common issue, is that just too many things are happening at once, and spreading that a little bit can resolve that.
So, fun fact about SQL Agent Job and like throwing it at 1 a.m. Apparently, at least according to this blog by Matthew McGriffin, if you put a job at 1 a.m.
Okay, here we go.
And it's the whole daylight savings time thing, right?
Okay.
The SQL agent will pause for that 1 hour that you get the extra hour, so it doesn't run the job twice. But I'm not sure what happens. I think it catches up for whenever it skips the hour. So you might have the situation where it runs a bunch of jobs like once per year. So that's interesting to think about. That was something I was worried about. I was like, what do we need to worry about this daily job happening twice that one time during the year?
Or get kicked off again. Yeah, that is interesting, right? Because that's when it changes. Doesn't it change at 2:30 something in the morning?
Yeah. It's like I think it's like the hour between 1 to 2 or something along those lines.
Oh, it's between 1 and 2. Okay, I have to look at it.
It's either 1 and 2 or 2 or 3. But looking at the blog post, I think it's between 1 and 2.
There.
So I don't know if it'll warn you about that though. But
Right. Yeah, there we go. So thank you. Little known facts.
Right.
The SQL Server. So very good. So, right, why do we say all of this? So we have decided to partner with SolarWinds here. So CenturyOne was purchased by SolarWinds. I think at first, right? So this time last year, a lot of heartburn around SolarWinds.
Right.
In the breach.
I've noticed you've been calling it Sentry the whole time, right? I was paying attention.
Well, so it is now currently called SolarWinds SQL Sentry.
Yeah.
So that's the name of the product.
Okay.
SolarWinds does have another database monitoring tool, which I never really liked.
Yeah.
I didn't care for it, right?
Sure.
And I still don't know that I would recommend it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the roadmap now that they have two tools, right, that essentially do the same thing.
Right.
Obviously, I'm hoping that the CenturyOne tool gets a little more love, but we'll see. But I think to their credit, right, they've been able to address it. It is still fairly, ubiquitous in the market. I mean, I think there are some people that decided to leave and go someplace else. But I also think that they were, fairly upfront about it. They tried to patch it. They, resolved it to the best of their abilities. And, it is what it is, right? But to this point, we've enjoyed our experience with it. And, I wouldn't say that, like all transitions, they can be a little bit bumpy.
Yeah,
but
sure.
I think the product has a good home, and I'm optimistic about the future. So, so with that, right? So as you're looking to monitor your databases, if you have questions about SQL Sentry, we're happy to talk about that. Right? We can actually help get you those licenses. So I suppose that's another way to help the podcast. If you're already using the SolarWinds products and you'd like to help out the podcast, right, let us know and we can help you with that. And then from a managed services perspective, right, as we help customers with their databases, part of our offering is leveraging a license or however many licenses, right, that we're monitoring of the CenturyOne product, the SQL Sentry product, right, if you will, to be able to do that, right? So you know that you'll have a tool that you'll be able to have access to, that you can participate in the alerts with us if you'd like, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if you have questions around that, we'd love to be your monitoring partner there. So with that having been said, I think it's time for a little SQL Server in the news.
Yeah.
We haven't done it in a while, right? So we had some big Lots of things happening these last couple of weeks, right? So first of all, we had SQL Trail, right?
Yeah.
That was the first,
That was the preeminent virtual conference.
That's right.
And then following that, there was a
Following that-
smaller, slightly less known conference.
Well, we weren't quite the headliner, right? What was it that we called?
I think we were like the opener, right?
The
Like
opener.
when they get some random band to like get their first shot. Yeah, and then then there's Bono or whoever you want to see.
Yes, we were the band that was outside where you get the tickets. That's what the band.
Yes,
right?
we were buskers. We were the buskers on the street.
With the hat,
100%.
you get to play the money in the hat.
Mhm.
So then we had Ignite, and then we had Past Summit, right? So the big exciting news coming out of Ignite is for the data professionals, and we haven't even gotten into the Power BI pieces, Eugene. So I guess that's something that I don't know that too many things jumped out at me, but I'm sure.
No, there wasn't a ton of new stuff for Power BI.
Yeah, but so the big news, right? SQL Server 2022.
Yes.
We don't have a date yet for that.
Yeah.
So it's in. I wouldn't even say beta, right?
It's early access preview. So like if you're one of the special 100 customers to get the golden ticket, you can check it out.
And I should say we have a golden ticket.
Oh, nice.
So if that's something that you are interested in getting your hands on, we can help you do that.
Yeah, well, I need to see if I have access as an MVP, so maybe I'll get my own copy of 2022.
Hey, there we go.
How about that?
I'm sure you have access, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, so that it is. So we will continue to go over the features, right, as they become more available. But a lot of integration with Azure, right? So being able to fail over or create. I'm not sure if they actually said availability group, but basically being able to interact with a managed instance in the cloud, right? That's super compelling. I am, however, interested to know how they're going to price that, particularly from a DR perspective, because managed instance is not cheap. So I'd like to. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to roll out. How they're going to make that available. And then, of course, right, making more kind of extending the Polybase feature, right, or functionality, and making it available for more places. So
if Kevin was here, I'm sure he could tell us all about it.
Yes, that's right. I'm sure he'd be. We'll have to save that for another episode, right? When Kevin visits us. So that'll be exciting. I think and I think we're reading the tea leaves, right? So talking with Mariano, we're anticipating or we're hoping, right? And this is all subject to change, and I can't give this is not Microsoft
Sure. Yep.
official, right? But I think our thinking is that they're going to target the second quarter of next year. So for an official release. So we'll see if that holds true or not. But if it does, you heard it here first, compañeros. So
yeah. Well, and you think about the cadence that they were releasing at, and I really think if it wasn't for COVID, it would have been SQL Server 2021, right? Because you had, what they were doing every 2 years. So they were doing like 2010, they just didn't call it that. So they had 2008, 2010, 12, 14, 16 was a really big release. 17 was this weird ugly duckling because they wanted to add like big data or some of the data science stuff.
That was the Linux release. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So they like had some features they wanted to push out the door. And then it was 2019. I really expect that they were intending on going back to their every other year schedule. So this is like, what is it? 2000 SQL Server 2021 R-1 edition or something. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like really was meant to come out earlier, but just life got in the way.
Sure. Well, yeah, I don't know, right? I mean, some of those integrations may not have been possible. I think even the idea. So the reason I say some of that, which again, so like the integration with the Purview stuff, so the data cataloging pieces.
Yeah.
Right. So Purview, at least in Azure, is still kind of in beta, right? Or they just released that. I think they may have just released it. So it's all still kind of new, right? I don't think that was
Yes.
really available last year. So that may
Yeah,
have been
that's
a
true.
feature that got added. Maybe that's the feature got added this year. I don't know, right? But,
No, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that.
so anyway, so that was the exciting piece of sequels of Ignite. Unfortunately, again, I didn't get to quite as many sessions as I'd hoped for. Right, so Sequel Trail kind of wiped me out, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's
Yeah.
more technical sessions." But then we had Past Summit, and
Yeah.
I'll admit I haven't had my ear to the community ground as much, but I mean, I didn't hear a whole lot of complaining. So I feel like people were all in all were happy with how it went. Is that your vibe as well, Eugene?
I think so. I mean, I think that people adjusted their expectations because, I think we're all just worn out with a lot of the virtual stuff. And
Sure.
I think with those adjusted expectations, people were pretty happy. But at the same time, you had Sequel Bits announcing its in-person date, and there was a lot of excitement around that, right? As a contrast. A lot of people talking about that, a lot of, people submitting.
When is that happening?
I want to say that's like May next year. It's a month with an M at the beginning. I think it's May, but basically it's going to be like springtime, and it's going to be in person. Like they're doing some virtual sessions, but it'll be in person. I saw a lot of excitement around that. So yeah, no, I think people were happy with Past Summit. I know Andy Warren did his usual blog post with his thoughts on it, and I think he had a good point that it didn't feel like there was a lot of a driving force or narrative that you get with a lot of like Past Summits and those sorts of things. But overall, I think it went pretty well. I enjoyed pre-cons. I got to moderate Ginger's pre-con. I got to attend a couple sessions. I thought the spatial chat was really cool. I know you found it a little creepy that you kind of have to like chase people, but being able to hop between conversations was, just really nice, reminiscent of actually getting to hang out with people. So I enjoyed it.
There you go. Yes, I mean it does kind of added a physical dimension, if you will. Like, hey, I'm going to join this conversation, right? And let me get close to you guys, right? I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Yeah.
So one of the things we participated in was the Pathway series, right? So the intro to Sequel. And overall, I mean, it ended up being a lot of work. We had to record our sessions, right? And video is hard.
Oh yeah.
Right. So it's one thing to put it together, but then it's another thing, right, to record it and deliver it and say it, so you feel like
yeah. Well, and it was difficult for me because like I do video all the time. That's fine, but like I kept worrying that I was going to get some technical detail wrong, and then like some rock star in the community is going to be like, well, that's not what a primary key is, and then what I mean. Like I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my peers. But yeah, video is hard. Like I think I scripted out my talk, and I do that with my Pluralsight stuff. And that just helps me so much with the flow. But if you're not used to it, it's difficult. I mean, one trick you can do is you could always like find a friend and then do a Zoom call and record that and basically do a one-person webinar,
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, it's difficult.
But I think all's well that ends well.
Yeah.
In our sessions, I think the feedback I got was that people were happy with what we put together. I do have to write a little patting ourselves on the back because when we were approached about this, they're like, "Hey, we want you to put this together and have this series."
Right.
And of course, I had written the book, and that was, we just we got approached, and so that was definitely helpful. And I guess where I was going is I happened to peek at some of the other series, and they appeared to be just a kind of a grouping of related topics instead of a step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in our case. Gotcha. And so I was proud of the fact that we were able to actually come up with a stair-step approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think that really helps folks to learn for sure.
Yeah. So. Yeah, we had good. Let's see. I don't know what the final count was, but I think we had like 25 people download the scripts to follow along. That was the last check that I had. That was before it passed, or Summit
Gotcha.
hadn't ended yet. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But yeah, so very good. I think is that going to do it for today's episode, Eugene?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, well, let's see, compañeros. Would you like to come on the show and talk about something you've been working on? You can email me at carlos@cicletapartners.com or go over to cicletapartners.com/contact. You can choose the I would like to be a guest on the podcast option, and we'll get you scheduled, right? We'd love to have you on and talk about what you're doing, how you're making the data platform a little bit better for everybody. So if folks want to update, and and it's unfortunate that Kevin's not here because I couldn't help but notice over the conference time he updated his social media profile.
Oh, nice.
His picture, and I was like, well, somebody must have found him, right? Or his wife opened it up and it was like, okay,
Right.
time for an update here. But if folks want to connect with us, Eugene, how are they going to do it?
Yeah, well, you can find me on Twitter at SQLgene, and I blog at SQLgene.com.
I always enjoy connecting with folks on LinkedIn, probably because I get an alert more than I do so on the other platforms. I enjoy chatting with you there. You can reach me at Carlos L. Chacon. Thanks again today. We do appreciate it. And the SQL. Bye-bye, y'all.
SQL Data Partners.